Greetings. Thank you for viewing this webinar. My name is Dr. Hilda Billups, and I currently serve as the director of the Webinars Committee for TACUSPA, the Texas Association of College and University Student Personnel Administrators. You will notice we have changed the format for this webinar just a bit. This is one of our pre-recorded webinars. In these pre-recorded webinars, we seek to learn from experienced student affairs leaders. Our guest for today is Dr. Suzanne Harris, who serves as the Dean of Students at Sul Ross State University and as Treasurer of TACUSPA. Allow me to introduce our facilitator for today's webinar. Dr. Anthony Edwards supports TACUSPA as the Director of Research and as a member of the Webinars Committee. Anthony serves as an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Technology at Tarleton State University. Anthony's teaching assignments include higher education leadership, higher education student services, higher education finance, higher education policy and politics, higher education history, and the Comprehensive Community College. Dr. Edwards previously served as director of Tarleton Online at Tarleton State University, a professor of biology at Panola College, senior vice president of talent at the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, and science department chair at Granbury High School. Dr. Edwards also served as a secondary science teacher in Fort Worth ISD and Huckabee ISD. Anthony's research agenda focuses on organizational change in higher education with respect to strategic planning, STEM education, higher education marketing, academic advising, and educational technology. Anthony has published manuscripts in the Journal of Higher Education Management and the HAPS Educator. In addition to chairing dissertation committees, Dr. Edwards supports student success as coordinator of the Higher Education Leadership Concentration of the Master of Education program in Educational Administration. We are very excited to have Dr. Edwards to serve as our facilitator for this webinar and thankful to Dr. Harris for sharing her willingness today. I will now turn the webinar over to Dr. Edwards.
Thank you, Dr. Billups. Dr. Suzanne Harris currently serves as Dean of Students at Sul Ross State University in Alpine, Texas. She graduated high school as a Trent Gorilla, where she was one of 10 in the graduating class, and that was a big year. After a wonderful stop at UTEP for her freshman year of college, she found her home at Sul Ross, where she received a BA in theater and music, followed by an MA in political science and public administration. In 2010, she completed her educational journey with a PhD in leadership in higher education from Capella University. Dr. Harris has served in many roles at the university level, including establishing a new TRIO student support services program and building a space and program for centralized advising at Sul Ross called the Lobo Den. Along the way, she gained over $27 million in grant funds to set up programs including Talent Search, McNair Scholars, Gear Up, and several Title V programs. After stepping out of higher education for 10 years and working with special education in the K-12 setting, she came back and served as Director of Academic Affairs before finding her way to her current position. In all of the roles that she has had, the driving force has been her passion for the impacts education has in changing the lives of people for the better. Her expertise lies in the art of meeting people where they are and finding solutions to build bridges to their future. When not at work, Dr. Harris loves to travel and has been to every state with the exception of Maine and Hawaii, and many countries as well. She's an avid reader and lover of sports. She's been married for 24 years and counting to her wonderful husband, Ronnie, and together they've raised 6 amazing children. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Harris.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's get started with the question. So, obviously, leadership is not always easy. So what's been one of your biggest challenges in leading in student affairs, and how did you overcome it?
Sure. I would say shifting mandates and landscapes, right? The game is always changing. There's always someone who you answer to. I answer to my vice president, who answers to the president, who answers to the board of regents, who answers to the state, right? There's always someone that you answer to. And I say this because it's important to understand that not all directives originate with you as a leader. Many times we're responsible for taking something that has come down the pipe and ensuring that it's carried out. A great example is SB 17, recent example, right? The changes that were necessitated by the passing of this bill were not readily accepted or agreed upon by all. Even still, it's the job of leadership to make it happen. And for me, this involved looking at how to restructure and respond, talking with staff to ensure they understood why and how things had to happen. Even if they might not have agreed with the moves, they were able to understand the why and how in relation to compliance with the bill. So, in a nutshell, it comes down to two words: the honesty and transparency. I do not hide or sugarcoat things that have to be done. However, I will always be in the boat, paddling my oar, to a ship with any shifting tide that comes down the pipes. That's just the way of leadership.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think sometimes, in all organizations, as leaders, sometimes you have to carry out the mandates that you've been given. I think, military leaders, like they don't get to choose their orders. They have to, execute the orders that they're given. And I think in higher education, that happens sometimes as well. Um, so, in terms of you talked about honesty and transparency. How do you secure buy-in from groups when you feel like maybe whether it's people above or people below may not necessarily agree? But how do you secure buy-in, A, from leadership and B, from your team?
So you follow that euphemism of like paddling in the boat with people, right? Um, the challenge becomes who needs to be in the boat with you? Like who do I have to get in the boat to make these things happen? So it's my role as a leader to reach out and build those relationships so that when the challenges arise, I can gather the support that I need. Many times in higher education, change comes slowly, and you have to be able to play the long game strategically by building coalitions of support. With evidence. That's one thing I learned. In my early years at the university, I remember I used to get upset because people wouldn't listen to me. And as a line staff, I was working with the students, and I knew that I knew what I was talking about, right? But trying to share that with faculty, with upper administration, they didn't necessarily hear me. And I had a great mentors like, get your PhD. And I was like, but I don't want to do that, right? I had no desire. And he said it happened enough that one day I was like, I'm registered for my doctoral program. What I learned through that process was how to talk to faculty, how to talk to upper administration. And evidence is a huge part of that. At the end of the day, administrative support is crucial to successful change and cohesive campus culture. But equally important is the support of line staff. It has to be, top to bottom, bottom to top. And the only way to do this is relationships, relationships, relationships. And they have to be genuine. Does that mean that I love everybody I work with and want to hang out on the weekends? Not necessarily, right? But at work, I'm going to do whatever I can to support anybody who needs it. And that dedication has paid dividends when I've needed information and support. The funniest example I have recently, we had a leak in a testing lab and needed to move this desk structure. And I mean, it was like, I don't remember how many desks, they were all kind of put together. But within, 10 minutes, I had 15 people in the room and we just picked it up and moved it, right? It was actually really simple, really light. It's cohesive effort. The only way I was able to do that is because of the time invested in people. So when I call, they come, because when they call me, I go.
Well, and I think you're also uh, indicating that part of leadership goes both ways. I mean, like, you can ask things of people, but, if you're not willing to serve, are you really fit to ask people to serve, right? And so,
Yes.
I think they go together. And you've kind of hinted at this, but what would you say is your leadership style, and how has that leadership style guided you?
Sure. I mean, I'd say for most of my life, I've identified as a servant leader. I am not going to ask someone to do something that I wouldn't do myself or haven't already done. I want to be in the mix, helping where I can. In my role, this means being at events, going to athletic games, plays, art shows, walking through the cafeteria daily, having an open door for students and staff. I just that's how I connect with people. So that's the style that I've always, adapted or adopted and utilized. But I will say that as I age, I'm beginning to also bring in some aspects of like a coaching leadership style, because I'm recognizing the need to train the next generation of leadership. You know, someday I will retire, right? Someday. And when that happens, who's going to pick up the mantle that I've tried to build? Who's going to be there? So I need to develop that. I value what every individual brings to my team, and I want them not just to be satisfied with their job, but to flourish in their respective roles. Um, yeah, that's and whatever styles evolve out of that, it is what it is. Sometimes you have to utilize things from many leadership styles just to get the
Yes.
job done.
Yes, definitely got to be adaptive and flexible, and being able to be a situational leader, I guess, figuring out what's needed for the situation. But uh,
Absolutely.
so you mentioned, training the next generation of leaders. So what's some advice you could give a new leader and maybe in the first 90 days or so in their new role?
I think the first 90 days is critical in any leadership role. And it doesn't matter whether you're new to the organization, so nobody knows you, or whether you've been brought up through the ranks, right? There are different challenges that you have depending on how you've landed in that role. Not knowing anything or anyone and knowing everybody and everything, right? They're two completely different challenges. But my advice is the same, and that is to listen and observe. If you come in guns blazing as a new leader, even if that's the directive, it's not going to go well. You have to invest time to learn the players and build rapport. You need to identify what is working well and what challenges exist. You can't expect that everything you've heard is going to be the truth. You need to be able to clearly articulate any changes that you're bringing by explaining what the challenge is and how the change would benefit the players involved, right? What's the benefit to this change? I work at a small campus in a small town, and many things are done a certain way because they have always been done a certain way. And there's a nuance to making changes and maintaining integrity and support. If you move too fast, you're going to erode your ability to do either of those things. So my advice, as I said, remains the same. Take time, right? Listen, observe.
You bring up a good point. I mean, higher education institutions, on whether, any organization, whether it's, governments or businesses or uh, they're not designed to move quickly. They've got institutional structure, policies, procedures, and culture. And so if you come in, energetic and wanting to, come in and make your mark really quickly, and you don't really pay attention to those little cultural, organizational culture types of things that, are important, because every organization is a little different. Some places are very much action oriented, and everything is about outcomes, and other places are, it's really more about established history and what have we done as an institution. And if you don't reference the history of that college, people feel like you're forgetting the history, right? And so I think that is really important advice in terms of listening and observing, not just I think what works and what's not working, but also, how does the organization work and what's important to the stakeholders, right?
Yes, if you kind of bring things back to that relationship factor, right?
Hmm.
Got to have them. You cannot exist as an island of one for long.
Right,
So take the time.
right. Well, for example, like, it's your institution. What would you say are some like maybe organizational history, culture things? Like, I'm at Charles State University, and we have, spirit organizations, and we have, some of these different types of groups that, um, you know, plowboys, and, we've got certain things that are about the cowboy culture, like there's certain things that are just about the history of the institution, and you have to make sure that you understand that to understand the context. So, like at your institution, what's something that is, I think helps to build the context.
I would think at Sol Ross, it's honestly the makeup of our student body. Um, we are one of a few places, probably in the country, um, that will accept students that may not be accepted at other universities,
Mhm.
right? Um, does that mean that our students are any less than? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, that's why I came back here to work, because I have never been involved with a student body like the one that exists here. But if you don't understand the beauty of taking someone who, um, you know, shows up on campus maybe a few days late, right? Who has no idea what they're doing, um, doesn't have any family support really that has navigated this road before. So getting them connected, taking them to places, walking a student from point A to point B, introducing them to people, sometimes multiple times, right?
Mhm.
That taking them from there to then seeing them at commencement, right? And
Right.
hugging their necks and like, what are your plans? It is the most amazing experience ever. And so if you're going to work at Sul Ross State University in Alpine, Texas, you have to understand that we are bridge builders, all of us. And these students are perfectly capable and they will soar if given the assistance to do so. Does that mean that I do things for students? No, they're going to walk the bridge with
Right.
me, right? I will guide them. But if you're not willing to do that, you're I've seen it over and over again, right, with staff if they don't and faculty if they don't understand that nuance, they don't typically do well here because their expectations are unrealistic, and they don't understand why they have to build a bridge.
Right. And I think that's also important as leaders. So if you're in student affairs, most people go into student affairs because they care about students and want to see students succeed. And the challenge, I think, of leadership sometimes is higher up you go, the less day-to-day interactions you might have with students unless you go out of your way to facilitate those. Um, so how do you maintain your perspective on why the things you do as a leader matter to students?
I intentionally take time to fill my cup,
Mhm.
right? My cup is filled through interaction with students. And I think many of us in higher education can share that perspective. Not everybody, but most of us,
Mhm.
right? It's really easy to get caught up in the leadership aspects and the executive meetings and all of those things, all the decision makings that we have to do, right? Um, but I intentionally, as dean of students, go to every athletic event that I can go to, right? I go to all the art shows. I go to all the theater shows. I walk through the cafeteria, which is downstairs from my office, almost daily, um, and make connections with students. I ask them, how's your semester going? And through those interactions, I'm then able, because things come up, right? If I'm gonna ask a
Right.
question, they're gonna have an answer. And sometimes it's not the answer that I expect. Um, so it forces me, okay, cool, let's resolve this. Let's work through this. How do we find a solution? And so what's come from that is that sorry, students I mean, they know my door's open. They'll come to me with random questions, right? It's ridiculous how many students at this university have my cell phone number. It's fine. I don't care. Call me at 10 o'clock at night because the sky's falling. I will help you out. But that's how I fill my cup,
Mhm.
and that's how, I direct that. I'm not told to do that. I don't have to do all those things as part of my job. But what I've learned is that as dean of students, when I'm there watching them, my conduct stuff is I mean, it happens, right? Conduct happens. Um, but it's negligible in the bigger picture of the university at this point.
Mhm.
And I attribute that to the fact that I'm always there, right? So we kind of head off things before they get to
Mhm.
um, the point of conduct, we'll say.
Yes. And I want to take a minute to ask you a little bit about your background in the sense of, sometimes we make different career choices and we go in different directions, and sometimes we can wonder, are our career pivots useful? Um, and are they in the bigger picture? Because like you took some time to go to K-12, and you worked in special education, did some things there, and then came back. How did that maybe experiencing with K-12 students or that experience working with students with special education needs impact how you worked back in higher education?
Sure. It was interesting the path. So I'll tell you a little history of why this path happened, right? Um, m- I loved higher education, right? Obviously, I got my PhD, leadership in higher education. Like, I was set higher education track. And then we decided to move out of Alpine to Rockwall, Texas. And I was working for a senior living organization after the move. And I was like, I really need to be back in the education atmosphere. Um, and I went to that because that allowed us the ability to move, is why I made that decision. Um, but when I got back into K-12, smartest decision I ever made in my life, right? Because I, I had become, I'll say, a little bit disgruntled with higher education. It
Mm,
was one of the reasons I left when I did. This was back in 2011 when I left. And I was able, through my journey through the K-12 environment, right, to understand more fully why we were getting the students we were getting in higher education.
hmm
Anybody who's been in this business knows that the dynamics shift sometimes every year, right? Like, what happened to that freshman class we had last year that was so excited? What's wrong with this freshman class? Like, how do we get them excited, right? Those dynamics shift. But I was able to go back into the schools that I hadn't been in a while. Been a while since I graduated. I was like, oh, this is what's going on. This is what's happening. And so when I came back into higher education, which I was, the opportunity opened up, and I walked back in like super excited because I love higher education. But I knew things about our students coming in that people working here had no clue. I
hmm
remember we have like our dev ed program. So if students
hmm
aren't quite college ready, right? They take dev ed class. And I was talking to an instructor and I was like, hey, how's your day? And she's like, oh, these essays, it's just 5 paragraphs. I don't need 5 paragraphs. Why can't they do this? And I was like, let me ask you that. Do you know what they have to write and how they have to write to pass the test to graduate high school, right? And she was like, no. And I said, okay. And so I went and I printed out the star paper, right? That had like a border around, and it's one
mm
page. It's got lines. I said, this is what they get to write an essay on. They cannot ask for another piece of paper. They cannot write outside of these lines. This is all they have. So it doesn't matter if they use paragraphs.
mm
It doesn't matter if their punctuation is exactly correct, right? Um, and she was just like dumbfounded by that. I was like, so what I would do is take this piece of paper, put it on everybody's desk, and ask them if they know what it is. They're going to say yes. Have them pick it up and rip it in half. And this is not how we write at college, right? She's like, oh my gosh, and this is somebody who's at the top of the game in the dev ed world,
hmm
right? Renowned, statewide, brilliantly caring lady. She just didn't have that connection, if that
hmm
makes sense. And so I'm thankful and grateful for that journey that I took because it allowed me to do that. Now, the funny thing is, they don't even use that anymore because I think it's all done on the computer now, right? So that even example is obsolete at this point. But at the time, 4 years ago, um, it was valid. So, I'm a big believer in life takes you on a journey, right? And your willingness to follow that journey um, manifest in many different ways. So that's the journey that my life has taken for many reasons. We talk about we raised 6 kids. We had 2 children. We adopted 4, a sibling group of 4 children. And so being in K-12 allowed me to be on their schedule and things like that, which was great at the time. Um, but it was never my final destination, if that makes
hmm
sense. I always knew I would land back in higher ed. So I'm grateful for the things that I learned during that time, and grateful to be back in this environment and to apply that, have the opportunity to apply that to my students.
Well, I think, like you said, a lot of times we in higher ed can think, well, what's going on there down there in high school? Like what are they doing? And then, you actually took some time to actually find out what they were doing. And so I think that's pretty awesome. Um, Now let's kind of back up a little bit, and perhaps maybe where we should have started, but let's talk about your current area of responsibility and some of the different things that you do that are within the scope of your responsibility.
Sure. So our student life office, right? It's myself and then my vice president of student affairs, Mr. Ben Teleska. But we oversee residential living, recreational programming, counseling accessibilities, career services and testing, civic engagement, Lobo Pantry, new student programs, university police department, campus activities, university center,
Wow.
Lopez scholars, compliance in Title IX, and health services. And yes, I had a list that I looked at because I knew I would forget something if I didn't. And then he also, my VP, oversees the physical plant as well. So essentially, everything at the university that is non-academic, essentially, there's a couple of caveats, but it's a lot, right? And in addition, I am the conduct officer for our institution,
Wow.
and our admin and I in our office, we oversee student travel. And then, of course, there's a myriad of things that occur within the student body that I respond to daily. Um, as those situations, it's funny. No 2 days in this role have ever been the same, and I love it. It's a bit of organized. It's not a bit. It is absolutely organized chaos, and I flourish well in that environment because I don't get bored. Um, but my boss and I joke like we have a list of things tasks that we need to get done, right? Every day, and if I get like 2 of those tasks done, that's honestly a good day, right? That really is a good day. Every once in a while that these blue moons happen and I get like the whole list done, I'm like, what just happened? And
You're
then I'm
right.
like, what do I do now? Don't worry, I find things, but
Yes.
it's this is not the shtick that some people want to live in, and I get that. But like I said, this is where I function really, really well in that kind of organized chaos.
So, in terms of your experience in student affairs, this again is not your first rodeo. So, how do you see student services changing going forward based upon where we've been and what you're seeing in the landscape?
Sure. So, that's an interesting question because at the end of the day, a good functioning student services program is in constant change.
Mm.
As I alluded to earlier, our student body changes every year, sometimes semester by semester. If you're really in touch with the students, you understand this. It doesn't matter how heavy your tradition are or how light your traditions are. It's, these students that we have today, they live in a different world than I grew up in, right? I'm not saying I'm that old, but I am older, right? I grew up when computers came of age, right? So in elementary school, we had like, the green screens with the Oregon Trail because all you could do was push a button, right? But it was so cool, right? We had
Yes.
computer time. I know now that I've
Yes.
taught in
Get the
K-12, I'm
Apple
like,
II
oh, those teachers
Cs.
loved when
Yes.
we would go to the Oregon Trail because we were just like this, you know, dying of dysentery. It's greatness. But so that evolved, as I was going through school from elementary. And then by the time we graduated, we had like word processors, were a
Hmm.
thing. And those, some people are gonna be like, listen to this, what is a word processor? It was a thing you could carry around, a little bigger than a computer, a modern computer, but you can type on it. So, when we were students, like email, my first email address I got in the computer lab here, on campus. I think it was like Suzanne Harris at hotmail.com. It's great. I had an email address. And it was really easy to get in touch with students, right? You could email them. Like my first round in higher ed, email was the communication style. And I would challenge anyone who today tells you that the best way to get in touch with students is via email, regardless of the fact that I think every university that has listed our official means of communication is your university email, because we have to do that. There has to be something, right? But students don't respond to the email. As the contact person who's trying to get, hey, you need to come talk to me. It's amazing how many times I have got to go beyond the email to make that connection. So I'm saying all that, that's just one illustration of a simple, small change, right? Throwing COVID, right? And it depends on where these kids were at when COVID hit, kind of how they see the world. Um, you have to be willing to change. And so can I pinpoint exactly what changes I see coming? I'd be lying if I said I could, right? I as in touch as I was with the student body back in the day, right? I never would have predicted that we would be here. And there's nothing wrong with our student body. They're just unique, like we were, right? How they communicate with the world, how they, gather information and process it. The real trick for us is how to communicate with them and how to teach them. We could talk about culture a lot. There are many cultures, obviously the bigger conversation about culture in our world, but I'm talking about like communication culture. How do you communicate in a professional manner? How do you talk with your faculty member, saying, hey, I missed class, but I need to take the test, and that's the only email you send, is probably not going to get you anywhere, right? I had a student in my office the other day who was calling a place. He left a message, and I was like, he hung up the phone. I was like, kid, did you give him a phone number to call you back? And he's like looking at his phone. He's like, oh, y'all are killing me, right? So he had to call back and leave his phone number. I don't know if I'm making any sense with this answer.
It does.
But, it's intrinsic in our job as student service personnel to make those connections with students and figure out how they're going to process the world. And I think, kind of going back to the last question, throwing that back, like my foray into special education, right? That's what I loved about special education, was that I had the opportunity to try 500,000 different ways to teach a child how to do 2 + 2, right? And I would keep trying every way I could think of and more until they got it, until I found out their style, right? And so I guess I carried a bit of that with me now. Like, okay, I know you can get this concept. How? Let's try this. Let's try this. So the future is going to be more change. That's what the future is going to be. That's my answer in a nutshell.
Well, at the risk of sounding cliche, it is still an accurate, I think, response. I think there's that old saying of the only thing that is constant is change. So I think it's still a safe answer. So, but I think you've probably been around a lot of good leaders at some point in your career. What's a lesson or action that you've learned from a previous leader that you still use today?
What's interesting? I have had some fantastic supervisors, some fantastic leaders, and they've made indelible marks in my life, in many ways. But the most lasting thing that I ever learned from an administrator was from a horrible one. And I learned that I would never do that to an employee. And so for me, that is to take credit for someone else's work. That happened time and again in a position that I was in. And I just absolutely refuse to do that. I will always ascribe credit to the person who deserves it. My people's success, I celebrate. That's my success. They're my people, right? I have a place in that, but that's their beauty. That's their idea. That's their contribution to the world. And I will always celebrate that. And it's interesting because as celebratory as I am in that regard, I also understand that there are individuals who will not do anything unless it's their idea, right? And so, I guess I learned it like double lesson from this, right? Always give credit where credit's due. At the same time, credit's not a thing that drives me. I like to be acknowledged for things I do. I think everybody does. But if something really needs to happen, at the end of the day, I just want that thing to happen, right? It doesn't have to be because Suzanne Harris said it should. And so I you come up with ways I'll just sprinkle it into conversations. This is something we need to do. This is something we need to do. And I'll sprinkle into conversations for 3 years if I have to, right? And then all of a sudden, somebody's like, we should do this. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the best idea ever. Yes, go with it. Take it, go on, move with it. I'm fine with that. So I know that's kind of a funky answer too, but it's me, so I'm always a little different. Um,
There's something to be said for strategy, because like you said, in the day, it is about execution.
yeah,
And so if you're always concerned about you getting the credit, you may stifle the thing getting actually done. And so, I think there's something to be said for sharing the credit so that other people feel like they had a say, or that it was partly their idea. And yes, you're planting those seeds and cultivating, tilling the land and all of that, but that it's helping to get where you need to get to. So, so that makes sense. But we've talked a little bit about your previous roles in K-12, but were some of your previous roles in higher ed?
so I actually took a pay cut for my first higher education job. It's gonna shock people, but I think my first job, I was an advising specialist for a Title
Mm.
V grant, and I was paid a whopping $23,000 a year for this job, right? I did it because I wanted to be in higher education. Um, and so that was my first touch point. And the day that I started work for this $23,000, this is funny. My boss at the time, who I may or may not have learned a lesson from, we'll leave that go, right, came into my office with a pile of like 350 letters and said, oh, and by the way, you're doing the PASS program and these letters need to go out today. You need to sign each of them. And I was like, what is the PASS program? What am I doing? Well, it turns out the PASS program was like a summer, it was an orientation program, 2 weeks long. There were two sessions of 2 week long. And I had to like fill those up with like, I think it was 50 kids each session, 50 to 100 kids each session. And it was me. And I started like at the end of March. So you get this. So I'm like, my signature changed forever that day. I used to have a really pretty signature. You will never see that in your life. It's like, chicken scratch now. Because I got about 90 in, I think. And I was like, no, we're not. Stuff's got to give. But that was my first foray. So I did advising specialist with Title V, and then the PASS program, which I fell in love with and enjoyed doing truly. From there, that grant was going away, and I was told, well, the student support services thing we really want, so get that grant. That's what I was told. So I was like, oh, okay. So I read up on it and I wrote a grant application and I got it, right? We got the grant. So then I got to be the director. So I set up a new student support services program. And from there, I again helped write another grant. There's a group of three of us, and we called it the Title V Lobo Den. And that was a really fun one because I got to refurbish the space on campus, and really build out a freshman center on campus. We did advising, we handled orientation. So all freshman, sophomore advising, all TSI advising. That was really great. And then I left higher education, right, for like 10 years, did some other things. Worked at a senior living community, worked in K-12 education. And then I came back. And when I came back, I actually got a phone call from the then president, who said, hey, I think could use your help. Can you come back? Sure. So I came back as a special assistant to the president. Then ended up as the director of academic affairs. We got a new provost in. We hit it off. And so I spent a year doing that, kind of rebuilding the provost office. That was really fun because I learned I didn't know everything I thought I knew. Right? You don't know what you don't know until you're in the position to understand that you don't know it. And it was my first real foray into the academic side of the house. Full time, I had stuck my fingers and toes in, but to be in it full time is a different thing. And then the dean job came open, and this is the job I've always wanted. I stood in the building next door when I was 18 years old and told the dean, name was Dean Ganaway. Dean, I want your job. I'm going to be you one day. And so, 38 years later, I think is I manifested. 30. How old am I? Yeah, 30 years later. Um, and yeah, so that's how I am where I am. And it's interesting because through that journey, and this is also my alma mater, right? So as I started off at UTEP, loved UTEP, go Miners, broke my leg. When I went to college, my mom came to college here at St. Ross.
Mm.
So I came to my mom's because I broke my leg and I had a hip to toe cast. So I couldn't work or navigate El Paso's campus during the summer. And I fell in love with St. Ross and stayed here for quite a long time. But to be able to, so I've seen it as an undergraduate student, as a graduate student, as a line staff employee, as a mid-level manager, then went away. So it was alumni view at that point. And I came back and I saw it, as a higher level manager, than admin. And then and now my kids, like my son just graduated from here in December, and I have a daughter graduating in December, this coming December. So there's not a lot of people who've seen the university from all of the aspects that I've seen it from. It's funny because, of course, I met my husband here, but I counted up, it's like 14 family members have
Wow.
come to St. Ross. I think between us, there's 17 degrees that we've accumulated in that time. You don't think things are that big of an impact until you stop and take stock of them. So it wasn't for this university, I certainly wouldn't be where I am, but neither would like 14 people in my family. So it's kind of crazy. Yeah,
Wow.
kind of crazy.
Well, that definitely showcases the power of the doors that higher education unlocks. And so, in terms of skills that you think student affairs leaders need in this environment, what would you say are three really important skills?
Um, I think patience is the first one that I would say, because the times they are changing, right? And that sometimes right now can be daily. I think that we all kind of experienced that probably this last fall. It was just a constant changing environment. Um, and you have to have patience to navigate that, because if you jump every time something comes down the pipe or something said, or you will wear yourself out in like 3 days, and and you're not going to want to work in this environment, right? But it's not unique to higher education. That's kind of the existing landscape right now. So patience, I think, is important. I also think you need to have tenacity. Um, you have to be able to, when I say that, I mean in the correct way, like challenge things that you feel are unfair or you see that are impeding students' progress, to degree completion or satisfaction, whatever that, the challenge is. So you have to have some tenacity to be able to do that, and to see that through, because change comes slowly in most higher education environments. I think it maybe comes more quickly than it did the last time I was in higher ed, but it's still a slow change environment, that anywhere that I've ever been. So you got to have the tenacity to see that through. Um, and then the third one, and this is a personal one for me, but joy.
Mm.
Um, you have to be able to find joy in what you do. Does that mean that I love everything that I do? Every aspect of my job I absolutely love? No, right? There are things that I have to do that are not fun, right? Removing somebody from a university, there's nothing fun about that. I don't care what they did. There's nothing fun about that. I'm not saying that I find joy in that. What I'm saying is, you find joy in the people that are walking this walk with you, right? You find joy in, the weather outside is great today. At least it's not raining. The ability to take a moment, and ground yourself in why you're doing what you're doing, to create a better environment, to do, right by students. That ability for people to be able to do that changes the way that they interact with and impact the student body. And ultimately, as student affairs, right? That's our bread and butter. That's our jam. If we don't have a student body, we don't have jobs,
Right.
right? So let's have fun while we're doing it, right?
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. In the previous question, you talked about how grant writing was sort of a theme in some of the roles that you had. Unfortunately, we most of us who work in higher ed don't have unlimited budgets, and so we have to figure out how to do the things that we want to do to support students. Are there some tips you've learned along the way in terms of grant writing that have helped you be successful?
Um, I mean, grant writing at this institution, I've been extremely successful with. We have a compelling story. We are a compelling institution because we don't, we're building our endowments, but we don't have big endowments, right? We don't have, there's a lot of factors that make grant writing here. Some of it's not a challenge, but man, it's a great story, right? And then to be able to see that through and to show what this money, how this money that you sent us, right, has impacted our student body. I can do that over and over and over again. I tried grant writing when I wasn't here, and I was not as successful. I will say that. So it's something about this space and this story. This year has been interesting. We had grants that were pulled due to political culture, right? Things that
Hmm.
happen. And all of a sudden, all these things that we had that were funded, that we were building, like, oh, now what do we do? Monetary incentives, what are those? Like, there's no stipends left to do these things. There's no, so then how do you get people motivated, right? Without the funds. We don't have a big budget. We have what we have. Um, and that, for me, what works for me and my staff when I don't have a monetary incentive to give, right, is fun. Like, I kind of go back to this time and time again, but you have fun. You as a leader have to, how can I compel you, Anthony Edwards, right, to work and have fun and do these things that maybe aren't fun, but we're still going to have fun while we do them, right? Um, I started a dumpster fire award that's going to be rotating through my staff. Like, I got a little crocheted dumpster fire and I gave it to somebody, right, for whatever reason. And now they're going to give it to the next person, because we meet twice monthly as a student life staff. Um, you show up to help out at move-in or movie night or career fair. You structure meetings so that the small staffs from our different departments get to know each other. Like, I know that you feel like you're overwhelmed at times, right? There's different times of the year, I think, that it hits different aspects of the university. And one of the beautiful things about having been at all of these places now is that I've seen that in several different things. And I remember thinking, I'm drowning, nobody knows what I'm doing. But then I was drowning over here, nobody knows what I'm doing. I'm drowning over here, right? And so I acknowledge that as frequently as possible. When we welcome new employees to campus, like, there are gonna be times where you feel like you're drowning, right? Reach out. That's what we're here for, is to help each other out. And so you help build those bridges and connections so people don't exist on an island of one. Um, Almost everything we do at the university, the beauty of that is that there's room for fun. So cultivate it. Um, and again, for the things that aren't, you lean on the relationships that you've built, and the trust that exists on your campus with your staff. Uh,
Well, that makes a lot of sense. As we conclude, I wanted to ask you if there are any books, podcasts, other things that you uh, enjoy that sort of inform your leadership.
So, for me, when I was getting my PhD, there was a book that John Maxwell wrote called
Mm,
The 360-Degree Leader.
mm.
And for me, for whatever reason, that really hit home. Essentially, the book talks about, regardless of where you're at in an organization, if you're at the lower rungs, the middle rungs, the higher rungs, you have power and influence. You can lead up, down, horizontally. The art is knowing how to do so. It's not a long read, so I recommend it for anybody who wants to just understand kind of what I'm talking about. It's almost simplistic when you look at it. You're like, oh, well, that makes sense. So that for me is what I kind of go back to, that particular book. I'm not really I don't have time. So when I'm driving places, right, to listen to podcasts. For me, My influence comes from people that I know personally in my life. And it's maybe not the people you would think, right? So I look to the people in my life who I have witnessed be powerful in their gifts to the world. And there are a few that I can name, right? There's a lady here in town who lived across the street from my mom. She still lives there. Her name is Mrs. Ann Talley.
Mm.
She's in her 90s, right? I met her obviously across the street from my mom, and her husband and her husband and I used to dance in the street. That was when we do our rain dances. We live in the desert, right? But every time Duff and I dance in the street, it would rain. Now, granted, rain was coming when we would dance in the street, but still, we were convinced that it was the dances that we did, right? And as time went on, Duff passed away, but Anne is still like I said, she's in her 90s today. But that woman taught me the value of and the beauty of true kindness, right? There's nothing that I have ever done that I've had a conversation with her about that she has blinked an eye at. And I was like 17 when I met her. Not saying I made bad decisions, but maybe I didn't make the best ones all of my life, right? Or decisions that other people in my life blinked at, and never, never, ever. Always met with kindness and love. And that has really defined how I move throughout the world. My grandparents, who are 88 and 91, they're still married, mom and pa. We they taught me the value of perseverance in relationships. Um, you know, they've gone through the trials and tribulations of marriage. They were, I think they were 15 and 17 when they got married.
Wow.
So yeah, 70 some odd years that they've been married. Yeah, that's crazy, right? um, they lost a son along the way. So persevering through that in marriage, that's a lot. And then my mother, who is the most selfless person I have ever known. And she taught me many things, but the most important is the witness of helping others. She would truly give the shirt off her back to anyone walking down the street. That's just who she is. And then my husband, who teaches me daily the incalculable gift of loving unconditionally. That's where I pull my influence from. As I said before, I may be a little bit different. It was interesting at the TACUSPA conference. I did a presentation on what kind of my journey through higher education, and now what I look for when I'm hiring people.
Mm.
And after that presentation, I had some people come up and talk to me, and like, I'll never forget this. She was like, "Thank you so much." Because I thought I was in the right place, and then I went to a presentation, and then I thought I was in the wrong place, because they're saying I needed to do all this and have all this background and do all these things. And I was like, I don't know what you went to. For me, that's not what I look for, right? You just got to find your right fit. And I think that's the beauty of higher education, is that there are universities where degree and pedigree kind of like runs you need that, right? But there are universities where you don't necessarily need that. I want someone who's going to work. Do you care about my students?
Right.
Right? Come run this program for me. Let's go. I can help you. I can teach you. I can do all those things. So, I don't know. That's just my influence.
No, I get it. In my early days before education, I worked at Enterprise Rent a Car, and they were like, it was hire for attitude, train for skill. It was just very like, we can teach you all the stuff you need to know about renting cars, but if you're not the kind of person who's nice to be around and likes to talk to people, then this is going to be a hard job for you. So,
For sure.
but I get it. That makes a lot of sense. So, but thank you so much for joining us today for this important discussion, Dr. Harris. Some of the takeaways that I got, well, shouldn't say some, but I got quite a few. But the game is always changing, so be prepared for that. There's always someone you answer to. Uh, you know, Utilize honesty and transparency. Who needs to be with you paddling in the boat? Building coalitions of support with evidence. Administrative support is key to cohesive change. Relationships. Servant leadership. Don't ask others to do things you aren't willing to do. Be present at events and activities. train the next generation of leaders. New leaders need to listen and observe, identify what's working well, what needs to improve, and clearly articulate changes and how they benefit the people that are involved. It most importantly moves slowly to maintain trust. Um, all of us should pay attention to how students have changed over time. Don't take credit for others' work, but be willing to share the credit so others are invested. Learn grant writing, tell a compelling story, and show how the money benefits students. Motivate your staff with fun when you don't have monetary incentives. Help them get to know one another. Student affairs professionals need patience, tenacity, and joy to thrive. Recommended John Maxwell's 360-degree leader and learning how to lead from where you are. And learn from your mentors and learning about important things like persevering in relationships, listening and being supportive and unconditional acceptance. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over back to Dr. Billups.
Thank you.
Thank you for viewing this webinar. We would also like to thank Dr. Harris again for sharing with us. Please check our YouTube channel for more webinars like this one, as well as recordings of our other webinar types. If you've missed a webinar, we invite you to watch the recording. If you're interested in presenting, serving as a panelist for a future webinar Wednesday, or participating in a pre-recorded webinar, please consider completing the proposal form. The link will be included in the description for this video. Finally, the TCUSPA membership year runs from January to December. If you're not yet a member of TCUSPA, we encourage you to join us. Thank you. We hope you have a great day.